Hi everyone, and welcome to this tutorial on understanding parts of speech. Now, students often find parts of speech difficult. That's not because it is difficult, but because it seems difficult or complicated. So hopefully this tutorial will break it down and make it a bit more understandable. Now, when teachers talk about parts of speech, what they actually mean is which type of word is it, and what's its function, what's its job, its purpose, what does it do in a sentence. There are many different types of words, but what we are going to focus on are the 8 main parts of speech, and those are nouns, pronouns, adjectives, adverbs, verbs, prepositions, interjections, and conjunctions. Each of those has a different function or job in a sentence, but when you bring them all together, they work together to create meaning, and that's how meaning is conveyed. The first part of speech we're focusing on are nouns, and very simply, a noun is a name for a person, place, thing, idea, or feeling. There are 3 main types of nouns that we're going to look at, and those are proper nouns. And proper nouns are names, and they always have a capital letter. So an example of a proper noun would be London or Miss Roden. Now, common nouns are the names of any group of people, place, or thing that are of the same type. For example, farm, table, plate, pens, pencils, etc. The next type are abstract nouns, and abstract nouns are a little bit more difficult to get your head around because you can't see or touch them. Some examples would be future, past, present, happiness, loneliness, remorse, and so on. After each part of speech that we cover today, you'll see a Let's Test Your Knowledge page. And if you pause this page, there are a series of questions for you to answer. So if you pause your screen now, you can test your knowledge of nouns. The next part of speech we'll look at are pronouns. And a pronoun is used in place of a noun. There are several different types of pronoun, but we're going to focus on just 2, personal pronouns and possessive pronouns. A personal pronoun is a word that refers to a person or a group. For example, I, me, you, him, and so on. Possessive pronouns are words that indicate possession, such as mine, yours, theirs, hers, etc. One of the main reasons we use pronouns is to avoid repetition. So instead of saying Sarah's, 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 we use hers instead. Or instead of saying Jack's, we say his. Okay, it's time to test your knowledge again. So if you pause the screen now, you can answer the questions based on pronouns. The next part of speech we're looking at is verbs. Now, a verb is a word that describes an action, a state of being, or an occurrence. It's not just a doing word, it's a doing or a being word. All sentences need a verb. Now, whether that verb's explicit or implied, it's an essential component of a sentence. Right, types of verb then. There are several types of verb, and don't let the names of some of these verbs scare you. So the first one we'll look at is a main verb, and these relate to actions and are the most common form of verb. So in the example, I went shopping, went is the main verb. Do unicorns exist? Exist is the main verb. And it rained all day, rained is the main verb. Another type of verb is a linking verb. These are main verbs, but they're not followed by objects. Instead, they are followed by phrases that give us extra information about the subject of the sentence. So in the sentence, the dragon appeared in front of me, the word appeared is a linking verb, and it comes before a prepositional phrase, in front of me. In the sentence, sandpaper feels rough, the word feels is a linking verb, and it comes before the adjectival phrase, feels rough. She's a wonderful pet. She's is a linking verb, and it comes before a noun phrase, wonderful pet. The next type of verb is an auxiliary verb, and these are used before a main verb to indicate doing, being, or having. In the example, I'm waiting, I'm is the auxiliary verb. In the example, does she want a cake? Does is the auxiliary, and he had seen her before. Had is the auxiliary verb. Another type of verb is a modal verb. And a modal verb tells us how likely or certain or necessary something is. So let's look at a few examples. I must remember to feed the hippopotamus. So must in that sentence is a modal verb, and it suggests that it's an absolute necessity that that hippo be fed. In the example, I might take a swim in a pool full of custard tomorrow. Not that you would want to do that, perhaps that's just me. The word might is a modal verb, and it suggests the possibility of that swim happening. And in the example, he will take the lion for a walk. Will is the modal verb there, suggesting absolute certainty. So a modal verb gives an indication of how certain, likely, or necessary something is. Right, it's time to test your knowledge of verbs. So pause the screen now and answer those 4 questions. The next part of speech that we're looking at is adjectives. And an adjective is often called a describing word, but it's better to think of it as a word that gives more information about a noun. Types of adjectives include comparative adjectives, and these are adjectives that offer a comparison between things, and they have the suffix er. And you add that suffix to the base form, the simplest form of the word. So for example, if the base form is soft, the pillow is soft, the comparative would be my pillow is softer than yours, because we've added that er suffix to it. Another type of adjective is the superlative adjective. You might have heard these referred to as wow words. They refer to something being the biggest or the best. So an example might be softest. So we take the base form soft and we add the suffix est, and that turns it into a superlative, softest. Other examples might be biggest, fastest, loudest, strongest. It's time to pause your screen again and test your knowledge of adjectives. The next part of speech we're looking at are adverbs. Now, an adverb gives more information about a verb. So in terms of its function, it's similar to an adjective, which gives us more information about a noun. You can usually spot an adverb because it tends to have the suffix ly. Remember though that the adverb might not appear directly before a verb or directly after a verb, but somewhere else in the sentence. In the example, I really like your new shoes, really is the adverb. In the example, slowly, I approach the figure, slowly is the adverb. And notice how you've got the personal pronoun I in between the adverb slowly and the verb approached. In the last example then, she talked incessantly for the whole journey. Incessantly is the adverb, and it is directly after the verb in that instance. That one was short and sweet, and it's time to test your knowledge again. We're now going to look at conjunctions, and like the name would suggest, they link other words or phrases together. And examples of conjunctions are and, but, or, because, then, either. There are 2 main types of conjunction. There are coordinating conjunctions and subordinating conjunctions. A coordinating conjunction connects words or phrases of the same grammatical type. For instance, in the sentence, do you prefer basketball or football? Basketball and football are both nouns, so we can join them with the coordinating conjunction or. Again, in the example, the movie was unbelievably confusing and extremely long. Unbelievably confusing and extremely long are both adjectival phrases, so we can link them with the coordinating conjunction and. A subordinating conjunction means that any clause that follows it is subordinate. So that means that it needs a main clause, an independent clause, in order for the sentence to make sense. Examples of subordinating conjunctions are although, after, despite, before, if, since, so, whereas, whilst and while. In a sentence then, whilst I like pizza, I don't want to eat it all the time. The word whilst is the subordinating conjunction, and that means the words that follow it, I like pizza, form a subordinate clause. The independent main clause that helps that sentence to make complete sense is I don't want to eat it all the time. In the sentence before we knew it, we had arrived. Before is the subordinating conjunction. We knew it is therefore the subordinate clause, and we had arrived is the independent main clause. In the example, we searched for hours, although no one managed to spot a dolphin, is more complex because the subordinating conjunction in that sentence is although, which means although no one managed to spot a dolphin is a subordinate clause, and we searched for hours is the main clause. Pause the video now to test your knowledge of conjunctions. The next part of speech we'll look at are prepositions, and a preposition indicates the relationship between space, time, people, places and objects. Far too many for me to list on here, but some examples include up, by, beside, near, below, across, down, opposite, among, around, through and behind. Some examples then of prepositions in a sentence. Let's have a look at the sentence. Below the water lies a mysterious creature. The word below is a preposition. You'll find it over there. Over is the preposition, and upon realising I was lost, I consulted my map. So the word upon is the preposition in that sentence. And it's time to test your knowledge again. So pause your screen and answer the questions based on prepositions. And finally, we move on to the last of our 8 main parts of speech, interjections. An interjection expresses an emotion, and it does exactly what it says. It interjects, so it interrupts the normal flow of a sentence. An example would be ouch, that really hurt, ouch being the interjection, and that's indicating pain. In the example, hey, I don't remember agreeing to this, hey is the interjection, and that conveys uncertainty or disapproval. In the example, I mean, wow, just wow. Wow is the interjection, and that conveys a sense of awe or wonder. Now pause your screen again and answer the questions on interjections. I am going to talk to you about another type of word now. It's not really regarded as one of the main parts of speech, but it's definitely worth knowing about. So determiners are used before nouns, and there are 4 different types. So there are articles, and you can have the definite article or the indefinite article. So the definite article is the, talking about a specific thing, whereas indefinite articles are a or an. Possessives then are my, your, his, her. Quantifiers suggest quantity, how many, so you can have several, many, few, and then numbers. So when you use 10, 20, 100, 7, 1,000, a million, that number is a determiner as well. Right, we've looked at our 8 different parts of speech. We've also looked at determiners. We know it all, right? Sadly not. And that's because grammar is really complex, and that's because words are slippery. And what I mean by that is that words move between parts of speech. They change their part of speech. So an understanding of how sentences are constructed will really help you identify the function of a particular word. So what we're now going to do is have a look at how the function of a word can change according to its place in a sentence. In the sentence, the water was green and still, both green and still are adjectives, so they function as descriptive words that refer to the water. However, in the example, they still played football on the green despite the rain, green becomes a noun and still becomes an adverb, because the green refers to the grass that they're playing football on, and still refers to them playing football in spite of the rain. So it's really important not to just consider the word itself, but to consider its place in the sentence and the context of the whole sentence, how it relates to what comes before it and what comes after it, and that will help you to determine what the purpose or function of that particular word is in that particular sentence. So context is everything. So let's put all of that knowledge into practice. Now that you know what each part of speech does, let's see how the parts work together. A clause then is a series of words, and we've briefly touched on this earlier in the tutorial. There are two main clauses. There's an independent clause or a main clause, and there's a subordinate clause which needs the main clause in order for it to make sense. A subordinate clause is a series of words that don't make sense on their own. If we look at the prefix of the word subordinate, sub, that means inferior, less important, or dependent on something else. So a subordinate clause is dependent on a main clause for it to make sense. Let's have a look at this subordinate clause. Despite feeling exhausted. Now that doesn't make sense on its own, so it requires a main clause to go with it. An independent or main clause is a group of words that does make sense on its own, and it forms a complete sentence. So an example of that might be, I dragged myself up the hill. The reason that that is a complete sentence and why it stands on its own is because it has a subject, a verb, and an object. I is the subject, dragged is the verb, and the hill is the object. So I dragged myself up the hill. So we've got all of the components there of a complete sentence. Let's apply our knowledge now to that sentence. Despite feeling exhausted, I dragged myself up the hill. Let's look at the subordinate clause first. And what I want you to do is to think about which parts of speech each of those words belongs to. So despite, feeling, and exhausted. Let's see if you were right. Despite is a preposition, feeling is a verb, and exhausted is an abstract noun. So if you got those right, well done. Now let's identify the parts of speech in the independent main clause. I dragged myself up the hill. Which part of speech does each one of those words belong to? How did you do? So I is a personal pronoun, dragged is a main verb, myself a personal pronoun, up is a preposition, the is a determiner, it's the definite article, and hill is a common noun. So if you got any or all of those correct, well done indeed. And that brings us to the end of this incredibly long tutorial. So thank you for watching, and if you like what you've seen or have found it useful, then please hit like and subscribe to be updated on all future videos. Thank you.